The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode number 53.
Captain to bridge. Spock here.
Making so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the original series episode, The Corbomite Maneuver. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
Well, and the Corbomite Maneuver, this is, like I said, the original series. It was the second episode of the original series produced, but it was shown 10th because NBC decided to mess with everything and rearrange the order that they produced stuff in.
TV stations never do that. Isn't that right, Firefly? Oh,
exactly.
You can kind of tell if you know that this was the first one they produced after the two pilots. You can kind of tell this was meant as a series introduction because, like, Kirk has this, okay, every department give me your report. And so that's a way of introducing the characters to us.
And some of the stuff is not yet finalized. The costumes, like Uhura is still wearing gold, and some of the set stuff was still going to change in the future.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting. This is a bottle episode. I mean, it all occurs on the Enterprise except for one scene,
and that scene was obviously redesigned parts of the Enterprise. So
yeah. Right. Normally, bottle episodes are where you just use your existing sets. You don't do anything else. And normally they're used as a cost-saving measure. But here, they're right at the beginning of a season in production order. They're as cash flush as they're going to be, and they're doing a bottle episode, which is kind of interesting.
I didn't see anything in the behind-the-scenes sort of information, but I wonder if they had plans for more ambitious scripts in episodes later on, and so they were saving up front. I wonder.
And it would also make sense if this was an introductory episode that to show as much of the sets and the people as they could, instead of having other locations that they're constantly bouncing around to.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I just know you have to be careful doing the Corbomite maneuver. I threw my back out once doing that.
Well, I was thinking, is it anything like the Picard maneuver? But apparently not. So
it's like the opposite of the Picard maneuver, apparently.
Yeah.
By the way, one way to tell this is early days is watch Leonard Nimoy's performance, especially at the beginning of this episode. Yep. Nimoy has commented on how the first ones they taped, he was in this like bellicose first officer mode. And you can hear he's got this really theatrical thing in his voice that he's doing that's more emotional than he would come to be, even though they talk about he doesn't have normal Earth emotions in this one. He's like, stand by to photograph. And
he's calling orders. And
yes, which we saw in the pilots he would do as well. Even right from the cage, the very first pilot, he yells out from the helm what he's doing. So it's it's an interesting. It'll vary after a while. Other things, they're still working out the tech. Things like Sulu is the one who gets sensor alerts, and the deflectors aren't shields per se, but the way they talk about it's like something that reaches out at a distance to push things away, and so they're working out some of that stuff.
That's standard actually in Star Trek. The shields are different than the deflectors. The deflectors are to push items out of their way.
Right.
Oncoming meteorites and stuff.
Yeah, I guess in the original series, sometimes the writers did not make the distinction as often as they do later. But yeah, okay, I see that. Yeah.
Interestingly, one thing with they actually call them deflector shields in this, so they kind of blur them. One thing that's in the original series writer's guide is we're never going to get specific about what our sensors are. They're just called sensors, and they always work.
Right. Although they are photographing in order to make their maps.
Well, but yeah, then you get TNG where like they're going down to the infinite detail of what particle they're censoring from what part of the ship.
Right. So this is also a first episode for McCoy, Uhura, and Janice Rand, all of whom get stuff to do.
Yep. And Uhura has green nail polish.
And the green hoop earrings.
Green hoop earrings.
Those. And like I said, she's wearing gold. Sulu is now at the helm instead of its science. In the previous, in the pilot, he was, where no man has gone before, he was astrophysics.
So he had a blue uniform then.
Yeah, and I think the producers realized they don't need an astrophysicist in every episode, but they want Sulu to be up front. So let's get him. And again, I don't know if we mentioned this before, but how groundbreaking it was to have a Japanese American on the bridge as one of your main crew only 20 years after World War II. That was pretty, plus Uhura there as well.
And Uhura, the civil rights movement, is at its peak right now.
Yes.
So that was controversial.
Well, a female black
officer,
comm officer was pretty incredible for that time.
Yep. So they're the way it starts, they're making star maps of an unexplored sector, emphasizing the nature of their travels, that they're out beyond known space and that sort of thing. And they're attacked by a giant space Rubik's Cube that...
Not so much attacked as just stopped and prevented from going anywhere. They're annoyed by a giant rotating colored cube.
It's essentially your big brother. I'm not touching you, not touching you, not touching you. So... I do like, so this is where we really get the emphasis. If you watch this on Netflix or Amazon or any DVD or whatever out there, you're going to see the remastered special effects. In 2009, they remastered the special effects of the original series. And so they look really good. And, and it's very interesting to see what they remaster and what they don't, and how they change it, and where they stay true to the original.
Although it is funny though, since they are 10-year-old special effects, they are starting to show their age just a little bit when you compare it to something like Discovery.
Yes, exactly. Although I think they intentionally stayed a little not as good as they could have been even 10 years ago.
And they still look good. They still a lot better than the original wireframe model or models and everything, floating models and everything that they had.
This floating space buoy that they encounter reflects off the hull of the Enterprise and everything. You see the colors. So you get stuff like that.
It didn't in the original.
Right. It did not. So they counter this. It's interesting that Spock is in charge of the bridge. Kirk is nowhere to be seen throughout the open, which is very interesting given that this is the first regular season episode produced, sort of the introduction to the series, that he doesn't call Kirk to the bridge right away. He stays in command, which is very interesting.
It's like, you just encountered an alien thing. It's like, get on the horn and call the captain up here.
Well, he tried.
Yes. That's coming up. So Uhura says she's not getting a signal, but they don't seem to try to communicate with it very well. Like, no signal on the hailing frequencies. Are you trying to talk to it? Maybe we're supposed to assume that they are.
One thing I really liked cinematically in this is, they try moving around it. Spock says, pilot us, of course, around this thing. And so we see it start to drift off to the right of the view screen. And then it just drifts back left to center screen. So we know it's a nice way of relative motion indicating this thing is not letting them go around it.
Right. So Bailey is the navigator right now on the right side of the command console next to Sulu. And he gets a little panicky maybe, or he raises his voice and foreshadowing. And Spock admonishes him for it. And Bailey kind of comes back after this is all over, defends himself that it's a human thing called adrenaline. Spock has a great line where he says, that sounds inconvenient. You ought to consider having it removed.
Yeah. and then Sulu looks at Bailey and says, cross brains with Spock and he'll crush you every time. It's like, whoa.
Yes. So then we have, after the opening credits, we have the contractually required visual of Kirk shirtless working out. This is going to be a standard feature of the original series. medical exams in the future involve laying down on a bed and pumping your legs. On something.
So he's there. McCoy is having him do a stress test.
Yes.
And they've got this kind of. It's actually cool to look at. It's this upside down. He's laying at an incline on a bed, and he's got his legs up on these 2 foot pedals on the ceiling that he's pushing to exercise and drive up his heart rate. And so that's a real medical test. I mean, there are stress tests that they do for your heart.
Yes.
And but the fascinating thing is he's upside down for this. It's like, actually, that's less efficient than real life, because in real life, they make you stand up and do this on a treadmill. So you're fighting gravity. If you're laying on your back, you're making it easier on yourself. You're not going to stress as quickly.
Maybe in 100 years, they learned something about stress tests and some magical medical thing.
Well, and don't forget artificial gravity, yada yada, technobabble, something or another.
Sure. So now here we have very keen insight. Our first experience of McCoy, we get a keen insight into the character. The red alert. Spock is called for red alert. It doesn't have the klaxon. We don't hear the sound,
right.
And McCoy does not tell Kirk that they're at red alert. Presumably the ship is in danger that needs its captain on the bridge, and he doesn't tell that. That should be a court-martial events.
I know this is bad writing on their part. Because there should be an audible signal that we're at red alert, like there is in real life when a ship goes on alert, and the captain should be informed immediately.
Well, and they did call general alert, captain to the bridge. And meanwhile, the captain's down. I don't know if McCoy turned off the PA system or something. Yeah, he turned off the PA system or something.
Right. And then as the captain leaves, complaining that the doctor didn't tell him, we get the first instance of McCoy's classic line, "What am I, a doctor or and in this case, a moon shuttle conductor?" I'm not sure what that has to do with anything, but that's
just
the first
spacey
use of the
sounding.
Phrase. Yes.
Also, notice as soon as Kirk leaves sickbay, he's in the hallway. We've got lots of extras.
Yes.
Who will also be the same extras we see in every other hallway scene later in the episode. But but we've got lots of extras in the background, and that's characteristic of the early seasons because they wanted to show us that this is like a ship with 400 people. They're crammed in like they would be on a submarine. But by the third season, the budget was so problematic they couldn't afford extras, and we see almost all empty hallways.
Yes, that's right. Kirk is walking through there shirtless, towel around his neck, carrying his boots, wearing little slippers. I thought that was interesting. And then have him going to the bridge. He contacts Spock.
He changes first. He changes before he goes to the bridge.
Right. He says, what's going on? Okay, I think I've got time to go get changed. So he goes to his quarters and gets changed.
They're really casual about this cube. I mean, I'm just glad it's not a Borg cube. You don't want to be that casual about cubes all the time.
How many times do you see that in later Star Trek series where Captain of the Bridge and, 10 minutes later after he's had time to get off the holodeck and jump in, go to his quarters and change, and then he shows up on the bridge.
I always think the turbolift is like the Batman's pole in this cave. Whereas they go through it, it changes them like a transporter. But that's just my headcanon. So Spock has determined that it's a device, not an object. That's a big thing. And then...
or a device, not a ship.
Sorry, a device, not a ship. I write it down, but I don't read what I write. So it's a device, not a ship. And we get this interesting camera shot. As Kirk arrives on the bridge, the camera, it's obviously being handheld, carried behind Shatner as he walks out onto the bridge, and we get this following shot. I thought it was an interesting choice. Yeah, it's an interesting choice of shot. Bailey
wants to shoot it now.
I vote we blast it, and Kirk says correctly, "I'll keep that in mind when this becomes a democracy."
I know they're doing it to set up Bailey's near nervous breakdown later, but everybody, you watch Kirk and Spock, and they're just dumping on Bailey early on. They are not nice to this guy. Well,
I think McCoy calls it. They're, at least from Kirk's point of view, McCoy says, Kirk, you promoted him, you see something in him, and it's sort of they're putting him through the fire. They're forging him into the officer that he thinks he should be. And Kirk doesn't, he kind of almost overdoes it. But I think, and I want to kind of bring that out now in our discussion, this is a study in Kirk's command abilities, his leadership style, this episode gives us a real insight into who Kirk is as captain of the ship. And I think it does a good job of that.
And it does. This is one of the things that, even though this is a bottle episode, it works.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a bunch of character studies all happening in front of us, and it works because it is so character driven.
That's right.
And that's what would have made it a great, after pilot episode of, okay, now you get to know who these people are.
Right. Yeah, you really get a sense of all of the different characters. You really get, we'll talk about McCoy, how he comes across in this one, and the relationships between McCoy and Kirk and Spock and Kirk. And you get Scotty's personality, Sulu's personality. You even get Janice Rand's personality in this one, which is interesting. So yeah, it's a good, interesting experience of the crew. It's really a character
crew intro show.
Yeah, I mean, this is a character driven. I mean, there's a plot here, but character driven. So we have this. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, because it is interesting where the actual bad guy of the episode, who isn't the one that they talk to, isn't you see him for like 5 minutes,
right at the very end. Yeah. So they have this briefing room scene where they've been held by this.
18 hours later, they're
half of them passed out.
Wow, are they patient in the 23rd century?
Yeah, they look exhausted, by the way. So Spock says there's a couple possibilities, but he thinks it's flypaper. It's designed to hold them in place until somebody else comes, which is an interesting.
It's been doing a good job of that.
Yeah. Kirk says, okay, it's time to take action. And Bailey totally jumps the gun, calling the phaser cannon station. Whoa, whoa, back off there, little boy, on the trigger. And Kirk, kind of admonishes him again and says, calculate a spiraling course away. We're going to slowly fly away from it.
Well, it's interesting, but you mentioned, the phaser cannon station. This one of these where it's obvious they didn't have the technology down because they treated it more like a modern day warship or submarine, where if you fire your guns, it's not like there's a button on the bridge where the helmsman hits a button and it fires. Right. You call down to the gun control, and that's who does the firing.
And we later see the firing crew in The Balance of Terror, because a member of the firing crew gets killed. But in this one, Bailey says phaser crew reports ready. So they're clearly not controlling the weaponry from the bridge directly.
Yeah, in the 60s, there would be a crew in the Navy. There'd be a crew inside the turret on the ship, directing it. Actually, today, the guns are remote controlled from the combat information center, not by the helmsman, of course, but by the CIC. So they are actually more like Star Trek today than they were then, which is just, we can get into a whole circular thing with that. So they do try to fly away from it in a spiral course, and it comes at them and starts radiating them. Sorry, from the short end of the spectrum. The Spock says, and Kirk is so calm throughout this encounter. If you notice, Bailey's getting really tense, but Kirk is just calm.
And Kirk eventually decides it's time to destroy the cube, and he gives Bailey the order. And even though Bailey was all hot up to blast this thing earlier, he freezes.
Yes,
and this is his first real failure. Is he freezes in a crucial situation.
That's right.
But then Sulu reaches over and they clicks two buttons and they destroy the cube and get their course locked in and stuff.
Right. And so now we have this moment where Kirk has to decide, do we move forward or do we go back? And of course the mission is to explore. And he has this little conversation with Spock where he asks Spock for his opinion, and Spock says, if you're asking me for the logical decision, and he's about to say we go back, and Kirk says, I'm not actually interested in we're going forward. And then Spock kind of complains, isn't it inefficient to ask me about things that when you've already made up your mind about them? And Kirk says, it gives me emotional security. And he gets a smirk on his face because he knows that really will annoy Spock he's giving him emotional security. So I thought that was good. And then
speaking of emotional security, McCoy then starts grilling Kirk in the turbo lift. So this is private. He's not doing this in front of the crew.
Yes.
About, have you promoted Bailey too fast? That yes, Bailey did freeze in that moment, but it's a really tough job. Even a seasoned officer would have trouble doing the job Bailey is doing, and he is not a seasoned officer yet. Have you promoted him too fast because you see something in him that reminds you of you?
Right. You of 11 years ago, he says. And it's interesting that what we're seeing now is like how Spock helps Kirk, in making the tough strategic and tactical decisions, whereas McCoy balances out Kirk as leader of a crew. And this is the balance we're going to see throughout this series. It really defines Star Trek, this triumvirate.
And this was not originally planned. Initially, at this point in the series production, DeForest Kelley is not a regular. They hired him for like 8 episodes, and he was just a character they were trying out. But he worked so well opposite Spock, they decided to make him a regular, and eventually he gets promoted to the main credits alongside William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy.
And you can see the evolution from Boyce, from the Cage, the original pilot, how he was the captain's confidant, his sounding board, and McCoy acts that way a bit in this one. And and so he has this moment, and they have this ongoing conversation that takes him to Kirk's quarters. I like the fact that Kirk keeps quoting McCoy, and McCoy denies. I never say that.
I never say that. Yeah,
you always say suffering's good for the soul. I never say that. Like, why?
Yeah.
So I like that.
They do that like twice in this episode at least, where Kirk quotes something he thinks McCoy always says, and McCoy denies it.
Well, McCoy is a bit of a font of Southern wisdom throughout this series, so I can see where Kirk would come up with that. So then we get Janice Rand shows up with Kirk's dinner because he's that captain who forgets to eat and doesn't take care of himself and needs someone to help him. And she brings him.
So of course she's brought him something with no calories.
Exactly.
Yes,
but he's gained a couple of pounds, according to McCoy.
Yeah. Kirk complains it's green leaves. He doesn't even call it a salad, and she calls it a dietary salad. Now, this is the 60s. This is the era in which the idea of dieting was still relatively new from the concept that we have. So that you would call things a dietary salad when you're trying to lose weight. And then Kirk eventually just complains, "Stop hovering!" And then says, "Bring a salad for McCoy." He's going to punish McCoy with the salad. And he's like, "Oh, no, I never eat until the crew eats," which is, he's the mom. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So
also, they've just been boozing it up in the middle of this, tense interstellar situation right before Rand comes in.
Yep.
Yeah, well, it's the 60s again, cocktail hour. You got to have your martini or whatever, your scotch on the rocks.
Yeah, I mean, if this had been was it Mad Men, the
yes,
the 1950, they'd have the cigarette in one hand and the whiskey in the other,
Exactly. So then Kirk complains about some idiot at headquarters who assigned him a female yeoman.
Yeah, the line is, as Rand is walking out of the room, "When I get my hands on the headquarters genius that assigned me a female yeoman." And it's wow, does that line not age well?
No kidding.
Well, McCoy insinuates that Kirk is attracted to her, that he won't be able to control himself. Yeah. And then Kirk
says, "What, you don't trust yourself?"
Well, but that's an echo of, again, going back to the Cage, where it's there's the female officer on the bridge, and Pike says, "I'm not used to having women on the bridge, not counting you, number one."
Right.
None taken.
Yeah. No offense. And then
I think what that is it's their way of hanging a lantern on it for this 1960s audience, because the 60s audience is not used to seeing women in these roles.
In uniform.
So this is
military.
their way of acknowledging it and moving on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, women were in the wave or whack or auxiliary during the war, but at this point, there were nurses in the nurses' corps, but not regular serving.
They would be the personal assistant of the captain.
Well, the idea of women even serving on a warship, although the Enterprise is not a warship, yada yada yada. The fact that women would be serving on a ship like this would put them in danger was completely unthinkable in the 60s, and it really wasn't until the 80s, 90s that the U.S. Navy started doing that.
Yes.
What I find interesting about this is the idea that headquarters would have determined who Kirk's yeoman would be. I would think that for someone who works that closely with a captain, because the captain's yeoman is basically his personal assistant. And I would think that the captain would have a voice in the selection of his yeoman. If you're someone who's basically running, like this is the equivalent of an aircraft carrier or a nuclear submarine, I would think the captain would have some voice in selecting that person. Does that
Right.
correspond to your experience, Father Corey, in the military, or would it just be here's your person?
Yeah, I think it would be kind of a yes or no. I think it depend on your position, but I think, for a lot of, again, Air Force, the generals would, they'd show up with their assignment, and here's whoever is assigned as your secretary.
Right.
Here's your person. And of course, depending if you're talking about like on a ship versus like a permanent base, it might be a civilian versus military enlisted. So I don't know. Again, I don't know, like when you're talking like the really high ranks, the high admirals, the high generals, even like, again, captains of their ships, if they would have personal assistants that they chose, or if it would be just, so here's someone who's assigned of this career field to do that work, that clerical work. I don't know.
I think in general, it's that we're assigning someone to you, and unless they're incompetent, this is their assignment. Like, you don't really get a say unless there's a clear problem with them.
Exactly.
I could certainly see, and that may well be right. I could certainly see it like if you're taking over a command, you're going to work with whoever's already there.
Mm-hmm.
But then when that person moves on, I would think you'd have a voice in, okay, I want to give this new person a chance or something.
Yeah,
I think maybe I'm wrong.
There could be a little of both. I mean, they're definitely,
because Kirk has been here for a while. This is not, Kirk has not just taken over this command. The uniforms have even changed since he took over the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's whatever the 23rd century does too, but I could see, especially where they're going out on a 5-year mission, they're far out, that sort of thing. You're not going to be back at base to reassign people. Well, the other thing that is interesting with this is he says, I already have a woman to worry about, the Enterprise. And I think this is the first introduction also of that idea that there's this relationship that Kirk has with the ship itself that goes beyond just, I'm the custodian of a vehicle, but he feels a real connection to the ship. That's
a fairly standard trope in this kind of literature,
right?
Yes,
but it's also kind of a wink and a nod to the fact that the ship, the Enterprise, becomes as much a character as any of the human actors.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, maybe, I don't know, I can't speak so much about TOS, but in other series, it really does become as much a character as anything else. It's not just a bunch of sets.
Right. That's true.
It's the captain's wife. It's like the TARDIS is the doctor's wife.
Exactly. Yep. So we have the ship that sent out this buoy show up, called the Facerius. We'll find that out in a second. And it puts the Enterprise in a tractor beam. I notice,
and it's enormous.
Well,
it's
before we get to that, the ship shows up, puts the Enterprise in a tractor beam, and Spock yells, "We're in a tractor beam!" Didn't you yell at Bailey for getting all adrenaline?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you should have that adrenal gland removed from your half adrenal gland or whatever it is.
Yeah, he only got one because he's half human. Yeah,
that's what it is. But you're right, Jimmy. Yeah, it's an enormous ship. What did they say? It was like a mile?
Over a mile in diameter, and it's just huge compared to the Enterprise. And I really like that. It's a big sphere made of glowing little smaller orbs, but it's huge compared to the Enterprise. The Enterprise is tiny in the face of this thing, and it's a very vivid visual demonstration of the superiority of this other group. So this is a real threat to the Enterprise, and that's communicated to us visually.
Right. And then we have we find out that the reason we weren't that the Enterprise was not able to communicate with the space buoy is that they communicate using on a different frequency. They're communicating via that navigation beam, Bailey says, and that's why they weren't hearing from them.
If the Facerius can send them a message over the nav system, why didn't the Cube?
Well, presumably it was. They just didn't notice it. I think that's the implication. Yeah. That's what I took from it.
Also, so they identify themselves to the Facerius as the United Earthship Enterprise,
right?
Which would suggest that that this is really a human thing, and Spock is here for some other reason. But we've achieved a united Earth,
yes,
right, and that's the main political entity in control. The idea of the Federation hadn't yet been determined yet. And so actually, if you watch these early episodes in the first season, they don't say they're from Starfleet. They say they're from the United Earth Space Probe Agency, or USPA, as they'll abbreviate it.
Yeah, this is actually the only time they'll ever identify them as the United Earth Starship Enterprise.
Right.
This one. But you're right. The idea of a federation of aliens. In fact, Kirk says says several times this episode, speaking of aliens, who aren't like us. And he's really talking about, non-humans.
Correct.
Excepting you, Mr. Spock, of course. That sort of thing. So it's a very interesting...
None taken.
Yes. And so Baylock, maybe they get the idea from Federation from the name of Baylock's group, which is the First Federation.
The first,
He says, I'm Baylock, commanding officer of the flagship Fesarius, and your vessel, obviously the product of a primitive and savage civilization.
Yeah. Aren't we high and mighty and superior?
Yes. Having ignored a warning buoy and then having destroyed it.
Sneer much?
Yes,
exactly.
He basically says that means you need to be destroyed. We're
more advanced and not as savage as you, so we'll destroy you.
Right.
Also, if that thing was a warning buoy, why did it stop us from leaving? We tried to retreat and go away, and it stopped us.
Yes, exactly. And we'll find out why at the end. I mean, that they do bring it all together. So Kirk tries to talk to him, and Baylock disables their communications.
Yeah, and starts scanning them like crazy and shutting off certain Enterprise systems, but not others.
Yes.
Spock notes it's only some systems that are going offline,
including the galley. Apparently, when they dispatch a record marker buoy, they leave the ship's log so that others can find them. Baylock destroys it, obviously. I mean, I'm not surprised that he would destroy it if he's holding them.
Even though they put in the marker buoy, don't come this way. Stay away.
Yeah, this is more indication that either we've got major plot holes or there's some kind of mind game being worked on us here, and it turns out it's the latter. And
he tells them, we're going to kill you, but we're going to give you 10 of your Earth minutes to pray before you die. We make assumption you have a deity or deities or some such beliefs which comfort you. Therefore, we grant you 10 minutes to make preparations.
I like that they do that. That's really nice.
Yes. The interesting idea that advanced civilizations would understand that there is a god or that other civilizations have a god.
Now, if they came back and say, guys, the Bajoran death chants take 48 hours, they would have had more time.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to respect our culture, respect our culture.
Well, was Bajor even known at that point? So
no, but I'm being
I know, I'm
being
kidding.
sly.
So now McCoy shows up and tells Kirk, that voice was heard all over the ship. So Kirk,
but he mispronounces the name. He says Balak. This always happens in sci-fi shows where they're inventing words that people don't know. And not the dialogue coach doesn't tell you how to read this word. So even though Baylock has clearly said his name is Baylock, McCoy shows up and says Balak.
Well, but that fits so with kind of the Southern.
People in the South can pronounce long A's.
I don't know. I'm kidding.
Presumably the voiceover with Baylock was done at a different time. But what I find interesting about this is that Kirk, hearing this from McCoy, says, okay, I need to get on the ship-wide intercom and give words of encouragement to the crew. Just to kind of...
We're all going to die.
Yeah.
Well, he says... Yeah, right. He says something interesting. There's no such thing as the unknown, only the temporarily hidden or not understood, which I think is the definition of unknown, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, but what's important is the way he sets that up. He says the biggest danger is ourselves, the irrational fear of the unknown. And it's like, okay, message coming in, sir. This is what Star Trek is all about. The biggest danger is ourselves and our irrational fear of the unknown. And once we get to know the other people, we'll be able to work with them unless they're the Borg.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, Bailey goes catatonic and then freaks out. Bailey has a major freak out. Why are you all just sitting around doing nothing?
Yeah, it's great. And Sulu, I love how Sulu is just there really calm. And it's like, we have 4 minutes now. And Bailey is like, and he's doing a countdown.
I love the fourth wall breaking on this, because this is something that they always do. They do a countdown. He's like, why are you counting it down? We can all read the clock. And even later on, Scotty will call him on it like, what is it with your irrational love of a clock, Mr.
Of timepieces, yeah.
You have an annoying fascination for timepieces, he says.
By the way, we should mention what they've just seen right before this, because Spock is able to hack into the communications system of the Fesarius somehow and turn on a camera over there so they can see the person they're dealing with.
Yes.
And this isn't essential that he does it. He just says he's curious what they look like. And so we get this weird, distorted effect. It looks like it's kind of underwater or something, except it's not really water. Of this scary puppet-headed guy who has, and it's clearly a puppet, but they put this distortion over the effect over it to kind of mask that. But it's like a bald, thin alien, kind of looks like Ming the Merciless without a goatee.
Yeah,
and
or Nosferatu.
He's got puppet eyes that go one way or another, and his mouth moves in a kind of puppety fashion.
Yeah.
But he's scary looking, is the point.
Freaked me out as a kid. I did not like this episode. When I was a kid and I saw this, I'm like, I do not like that scary alien.
And then they use this image of this scary alien like in the end credits from then on
every
to the end of
episode.
this series.
Stop doing that! You're scaring me.
What I liked even better than this was the Tholian, when they eventually get to see the Tholian commander, and it's like, ooh, glowing crystal alien.
Yes. I thought it was interesting that even though they remastered all the special effects, they kept the same effect for Blaylock. Baylock. I was thinking Jolene Blaylock. Baylock. Here. Probably because they see it in person at the end of the episode, but still, it's the same effect. I thought that was interesting. So Spock at this point is about to say sorry to Kirk. In fact, he interrupts himself. I regret that I have no other logical alternatives.
By the way,
they
relieve Bailey, so they send him out and Kirk tells McCoy to take him to his quarters.
Yes. So it's interesting how, so we have Bailey's out, and the nerves are starting to fray. Kirk is not as calm and in control as he was. He's starting to get a little more afraid. Spock is a little more afraid. McCoy comes back and challenges.
Well, before then, Spock says, when he's saying, I'm sorry, I don't have any alternatives, he compares it to chess and says, in chess, when you're overwhelmed, it's just checkmate, and that's all there is to it, and that's the situation we're in.
Right. And Kirk obviously does not want to, give up. He doesn't believe in the no-win situation, right?
Never give up, never surrender. Oh, wait, that's different.
That's a different show. Yeah.
I don't believe in the Kobayashi Maru. So McCoy comes back, and in the midst of this crisis, where they have 7 minutes left.
At this point, it's 3 minutes left.
Right.
Before they're all dead, McCoy comes back and tells Kirk, he picks a fight with Kirk, tells him he wants to enter Bailey's condition in his medical log that's about to be obliterated as simple fatigue instead of hysteria. And when Kirk doesn't go along with that, he threatens to report Kirk in his medical reports that no one's ever going to see because they're about to all be blown up. And then Kirk bites his head off. And so they're having this really catty spat here as they're all about to die about who's going to report who and say what.
It starts out, they're keeping it quiet. They're talking, quietly to one another, like in a sort of an aside. But McCoy, this is not the time in the midst of this
time and a
situation.
place, dude.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Kirk orders him to drop it. And when he does it, that's when he, blows up at him. And later on, Kirk will apologize for blowing up, and McCoy will admit his timing was bad. But at this point, McCoy says, I'm not bluffing about reporting you. Kirk's like, what are you talking about right now?
Exactly.
But dude, I need to be thinking about how we're going to save our lives.
Yes.
Exactly.
But this gives Kirk the idea for the bluff about Corbomite, which he says, he tells Baylock, it's a material device that will blow up with equal intensity on you with whatever you shoot us with. Whatever you hit, I'm rubber, you're rubber and I'm glue or whatever it is. And whatever you shoot at me sticks on you.
He tells Spock, not chess, Mr. Spock, poker.
Right.
So he's going to take McCoy's idea of I'm not bluffing and turn it into a bluff for the Fesarians.
Right. Now, it doesn't seem to have an effect. Spock thinks it's failed. And then while they're waiting as the clock ticks down, Spock is kind of like, well, Baylock kind of reminds me of my father. And Scotty says, heaven help your mother. And Spock says she thought herself a lucky Earth woman.
And so this is the first time in the second pilot, Spock had said one of my ancestors was human. Now we learn it's his mom.
Yes. In the last minute, Bailey comes back to the bridge and asks to be, to die at his station.
So he gets some redemption there. A couple of other things earlier in this. So one of the things that was always left vague in the original series was exactly when this is in the future. But this episode surprisingly gives us a pretty clear time frame because Kirk says to the aliens that the Corbomite, it's been because they've had their records scanned. So he says the Corbomite has always been kept secret, and this makes no sense, frankly. It's like, if you're building a doomsday device, why don't you tell the world?
Right. Dr. Strangelove.
You have this device, you want to let people know about it so they don't try this.
Exactly.
But he says it's since the early days of spaceflight, it's been on all of our ships, and since it's in the Corbomite device, and since its initial use 2 centuries ago, no attacking ship has survived. So that tells us that, we know when the early days of spaceflight is. That's like 1960s or within a century of that. And add a couple more centuries since the fictional first use of the Corbomite device. And that gives us the approximate time frame of the original series.
Right, the 22nd or 23rd century. And later on in TNG, it'll get settled as the 23rd century.
Yeah.
So they count it down and they pass the deadline. As Sulu at one point says, if anyone's interested, it's 30 seconds left. Like he cannot help himself. I have to count it down, and he does it from 10 even. And they pass it, and they wait another minute, and they kind of breathe easy. And then McCoy says to Spock, "I'm going to teach you poker sometime."
Yeah.
And this is the moment when Janice Rand shows up again.
Yeah,
bringing coffee to the bridge.
Actually, there's a little bit before that. So the Baylock gets on the phone again and tells them, we have delayed your destruction, but we want, in order to cancel it, we want proof of Corbomite. And Kirk says let him sweat and doesn't answer. And then when he says, okay, pick up the line, request denied, and he gives the kill the line cut signal. And so that's all he says. And at that point, Rand comes up, and it's like, now we've all survived. It's time to have coffee.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the ad. It's Maxwell House in the future.
and coffee in basically silver painted styrofoam cups.
Yeah. Yes, right. Because in the future, everything is chrome.
I love how, because the galley's been shut down, McCoy is like, how did you make this coffee? And it's like, I just hand phasered it. Zap, and instant hot coffee. And
that's right.
I'm like, that is so cool. That reveals Janice Rand's personality to us.
It's she is the efficient yeoman.
She's practical. She is committed to doing her job, as ridiculous as it is. She's committed to doing her job, and she's gonna do whatever she needs to accomplish what she wants.
Yep.
Right. And coffee, it's all purpose. Whatever you need in a tense situation is coffee.
Yep.
So Baylock switches gears and says, okay, now instead of destroying you, I'm going to strand you on a planet and destroy the Enterprise then. So I'm going to take you in tow and take you to that planet. And so a smaller ship breaks off from the big mile-wide ship and does the towing. I'm not sure why that would be necessary.
The big ship looks like a big sphere made out of small little round lights. And several of the little round lights break off. And at first I thought there were 4 lights, but I counted, and there are 5 lights in the little small ship that takes them in tow. And Baylock says he's in that ship. So he's personally towing them to the planet where he's going to strand them.
Now they want to see if they can break away. And they notice over time, their theory is that this is a big strain on this little ship. And they notice over time that they're starting to slow down a little, that the tractive beam is getting a little weaker. And so that Kirk says, all right, now's the time. So they tax his engines by trying to break away. We have this long sequence where they're straining and they're about to be destroyed, and the engines overheat by thousands of degrees. And
as they're doing that, we can see the tug of war visually, because the little 5-light ship is pulsing brighter and brighter.
Right.
As that's
And then-
happening, it's having to expend more energy to keep him in tow.
And the Enterprise is shaking, and we get that because there's the corridor shots where everybody is flailing from one side of the corridor then to the other side of the corridor in synchronization.
The inertial dampers can't quite keep you from being smashed, but they're good enough that you're not completely turned into a puddle.
Maybe that's one of the systems that's been disabled by Baylock.
Well, if they were completely disabled, they'd be puddles of goo.
Also, I like that we get to see exactly the same corridor extras we saw scenes and scenes earlier. It's like, yeah, we're getting closure on those guys. We bonded them in the first time we saw them in the corridor, and now we see what's happening to their individual story arcs.
You just wander around the corridors, go do something. So the Baylock ship is disabled, and he's in need, apparently.
Yeah, and we know it's disabled because it ceases pulsing, and it's no longer glowing.
And he sends out a distress signal, but the signal is too weak. It wouldn't be picked up by the Fesarians, which is now so far away. So Kirk says, all right, we're going to show them what we're made of. We're going to rescue. We're going to take a rescue. And he decides to take McCoy and Bailey. McCoy because if Baylock is injured, and Bailey for redemption
personal
purposes.
Story arc.
Yes, he's going to redeem him. Scotty in the transporter room says, you'll want to crouch down, gentlemen. It's a cramped space over there. So they kind of hunch over a little bit. I hope they hunched over enough. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I think Scotty presumably had some measurement that was telling him, okay, they're hunched over enough to transport into the space.
If I were Scotty, I'd be like, lower. I would have them like kneeling down and then beam them over and have like a 12-foot ceiling.
But it is nice because as we're going to learn, the alien actually is tiny by Earth standards. And so his ship is built to scale. They don't have 8-foot, 10-foot ceilings over there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they find out that the Baylock that they saw on the screen was a dummy and that the real Baylock looks like a big baby, which is But in fact, it is 6-year-old Clint Howard who plays Baylock, Ron Howard's brother.
7 at this time.
Well, what I saw said 6, but maybe you're right. But in every case, he's young. He's Ron Howard's brother. Ron Howard, who would be Opie at the time, would be Opie in
Mayberry. Andy Griffith's show.
Andy Griffith's show, right. And would later on, Clint Howard has an acting career as an adult. In fact, he was in Discovery last season.
He's actually been in every major season or series or time frame, if you will, of Star Trek episodes. Because he was in Enterprise as one of the Ferengi. He was in DS9 as a homeless guy in the past tense episode where they go back to San Francisco. And then he was the creepy Orion who tried to steal the demolition device from Tilly.
That's right.
Drugged her out and tried to steal the device. What do you expect me to do? I'm an Orion.
Yeah, he also has a guest part in the series Fringe, which is not a Star Trek series, but he plays a crazy man who tells the Fringe characters that the Romulans are doing stuff.
Awesome. Another Star Trek connection. Now,
he's made a career out of just kind of odd, strange-looking people because he's an odd, strange-looking person.
And being in his brother's movies, which is it helps to have your brother as a director.
Now, even though he's like 6 or 7 years old at this point, we don't hear his voice. Part of what's unnatural about him, so they've put a bald cap on him, and they put a kind of weird gossamery, shimmery costume on him, and they've given him big artificial red eyebrows.
Yes.
And he actually, if you look at Baylock, the puppet, and compare it to Clint Howard, it's like, okay, this is like a distorted version of the same race, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, like they're both bald and stuff like that. But Baylock is much taller, more sinister looking. And Baylock has this, you have 10 minutes voice.
The puppet Baylock.
Baylock. But then the actual Baylock is, they have dubbed an adult voice, but it's a high-pitched male voice.
Right.
So it has this extra unnatural quality that it doesn't look right coming out of the mouth of a child. And it's like, this is Tranya. I hope you relish it as much as I.
We have, it is kind of creepy. The dubbing is well done. I mean, when they did this back in the day, whoever dubbed over Clint Howard's voice kept the mouth movements, and that all worked out. And so they never come out and say it exactly, but the presumption is because Baylock's species is smaller compared to pretty much all the other species we see in Star Trek. They're all generally human-sized or bigger. Some are smaller, but most are bigger. That this would be a natural way of being. Like, imagine if we went out into the galaxy and we found out that all other species in the galaxy were 10 feet tall and bigger. We would have to figure out ways that they would respect us and not stomp all over us out there. So that's presumably the idea, and that this has all been a test. He had no intention of killing them or destroying them, but he wanted to test humans and see, are they peaceful? Yeah. What kind of people are they?
And he knows. He compares the puppet to himself as he's the Mr. Hyde to my Dr. Jekyll.
Right.
Yep. And it's like, okay. And so you're immediately wondering, okay, yeah, you scanned their record banks. You know enough to know about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Why would you put them through this elaborate series of mind games? And he says, and Kirk asks him the question. So they hang a lantern on it. Yeah. And he says, well, it could have been a deception. And it's like, okay, that paper's over it, but it's not really a satisfying explanation. If you read their entire cultural history, that's going to really tell you who they are. This is the one little test. I mean, if they're deceptive enough to plant a completely fictitious history with a fictitious psychological portrait of who they are in their computer banks, they're deceptive enough to trick you now.
Yeah. Which they did with the Corbomite.
Yeah. So that doesn't really hang together, but they do have a paper explanation for it. Yeah. Also, the Tranya that they drank, there are different accounts about what the Tranya actually was. According to one account I've seen, Clint Howard said it was grapefruit juice. Another one, though, my memory is Clint Howard said it was apricot juice, and Shatner said it was apricot juice that they had put food coloring in. Either way, Clint Howard hated it as a little kid, and his dad, Rance Howard, who also has a career in sci-fi and appeared as Captain Sheridan's father in Babylon 5, Rance Howard said, "You're going to drink that." And so he did.
Yep. So, and then we have this proposition of a cultural and information exchange, and Bailey's going to stay behind with Baylock and learn as much as he can about the First Federation, etc.
And teach him about us and our adrenal glands and problems with hysteria.
That's right. He says, "Oh, you must be the best of humanity." And he says, "Far from it, but maybe that's a better way for you to learn about us." So we can hope. So that's any other notes, Father Corey? Anything else on that? Okay, Jimmy, how about you? Anything else to say?
I was just sorry that after spending all this, this is a character study show, and so we learn a lot about our main characters, especially Kirk. But we also learn about McCoy, who's going to become a main character. We learn a little bit about Spock. We learn lesser amounts about the others, but a little bit. But the person other than Kirk that we learn most about is Bailey.
Yeah.
And this is his only appearance.
Yeah.
They should have made him a main character after this, and we should have seen his ongoing story arc and maturation as a navigator.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting idea that we should have seen him growing. I mean, if today that would be much more likely. That would be.
Yeah. They apparently did have him in some drafts of later scripts as they were being written, but he never made it to screen again.
Interesting. So I do want to, before we finish, I want to have we have some feedback from some listeners, or at least one listener. We have an email from James Cook who asks, just curious, do any of your Secrets of Star Trek episodes, especially those focusing on DS9, discuss that other space station series, Babylon 5, which aired about the same time as DS9? My cable service carries the Comet channel, which has been re-airing Babylon 5 the past few months, and watching them, I recalled how much more I enjoyed Babylon 5 over DS9, and then says a Secrets of Star Trek episode comparing them might be interesting. But, and I imagine we have brought it up in our overview of DS9 and in particular episodes, and they will continue to do that. Compare it where they're comparable.
It would even be worth taking a Secrets of Star Trek episode and devoting it to comparisons between DS9 and Babylon 5.
Before we can do that, though, I'm going to actually have to watch Babylon 5. So,
you've never really?
Yes, I have not watched everything. Well, in my defense, and I think I mentioned this before, where I was living when Babylon 5 was on, I did not have access to that cable channel, whichever cable channel it was.
I had the same problem, but I went back. I guess actually this was probably 15 years ago now and sat down. It was before it was longer than that because before I went to the seminary. But sat down and did the entire. It was like when Netflix finally got, Netflix was still doing just DVDs. That's how long ago it was. So I would just do the DVDs of Babylon 5 and went through the
pre-streaming.
I was a huge fan of Babylon 5, and there's a fascinating behind the scenes stuff between the two shows. Famously, there's a controversy about to what extent is DS9 a ripoff of Babylon 5, and the answer is it's somewhere in the middle. But there are other things like there's the episode of DS9 where they play baseball against the Vulcans.
Mm-hmm.
And that's inspired by a real life softball game that they had against the crew of Babylon 5. And so how the team on DS9 are the Niners, because of DS9. That's inspired by the fact that when their cast played the cast and crew of Babylon 5, the Babylon 5 people all had jerseys with the number 5. It's like there's no law against this, so we're all number 5.
That's awesome.
That's funny.
Good. Yeah. So we often get people recommending, can you do a show about or talk about different other properties? But the limitation is someone leading the discussion has to have watched them. So
there's that limitation, and there's the limitation of time as well. As there's lots of series we would love to have discussions about, and actually taking the time to do that is a whole nother story.
I think we can make this one work, though. I've got an idea how we could do it.
Okay,
cool.
But the odds of these things happening are much higher if we have your financial support that provides us with the ability to do it. Yes. Because the limitation is time, because there's so much to be done. We have right now about a dozen podcast shows out there, so that's a lot of organizing and recording and all that sort of thing. And I mention that now because this is when we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who do make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Trek and all of the shows we do on StarQuest. And I want to especially thank this week John K., Chris, John D., Joseph F., and Ronald S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com make this possible. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give, and maybe we can have the resources to do a show about your favorite thing, too. So it makes it more possible, that's for sure. So that's it from us. What did you think of the original series, The Corbomite Maneuver? Was it one of your favorites? Was it good? What do you think of what we had to say about it? Go to sqpn.com/trek or the SQPN Facebook page and leave us some comments about it. Leave us some feedback. We'll read your feedback in a future show, perhaps. Or you can send us an email to trek@sqpn.com, and we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing The Next Generation's The Naked Now. You're welcome. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, if I jumped every time a light came on around here, I'd end up talking to myself.